you want to turn off our.
Welcome to those coming in. Welcome to Friday morning of TESC. A little different than our normal Friday morning in State College. I'm sure we all wish we were in person, but this virtual platform has allowed us to really accomplish some great presentations this year. We are going to get our session started in a few minutes. We'll let some people come in. We were talking earlier, everyone's missing all the good snacks at Penn State from the breaks. But hopefully you all had some good snacks. We'll wait another minute just to get things rolling. We got a great session today and 4 speakers, so we want to get rolling soon. All right, we're about 2 minutes in, so we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. My name's David DeGioia. I'm with McMahon Associates. Thanks for coming to our second session of Smart Cities, Shared Mobility in a Post-COVID World. We've all been dealing with the COVID situation for almost a year now. So there's a lot of interesting topics to discuss today. I wanted to just remind people the Q&A is open and the chat's open to send questions in. We're gonna have everyone present a little bit and then have a discussion. The bios are on the Penn State website. Please go review them, look at them. Without any further ado, I'm gonna turn it over to our moderator, Lisa K. Schweier. And Lisa K. is the program manager for Carnegie Mellon University's Traffic 21 Institute. And Lisa's gonna lead us into the presentation.
David, thank you so much for the introduction and for helping put together both of these sessions and kind of taking a really hard look at how smart cities and shared mobility is evolving in this current post-COVID world and where it will go in the future. I was thinking about this session and what we were going to talk about, and I thought, you know, it's like thinking you'd like to have a crystal ball to be able to figure out where things are going to go. And instead of the crystal ball, somebody hands you a magic 8-ball and it says, please shake again. So it's a tough time. And we're really pleased to have with us 4 speakers today who are going to talk on 4 topics related to mobility. One, we'll be starting off on regional planning. Then we're going to be hearing about commuter transportation, transportation management associations, and university transportation. I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. For those of you in Pennsylvania, it is a beautiful, warm day on a Friday. And I'm pretty sure if we were at State College, people would be off golfing. So this was a great way to be able to get everybody into the same room. So first, I'm going to introduce our first speaker on regional planning, Vincent Valdez. He is the Executive Director of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. Vincent?
Thank you very much, Lisa. I'm really very happy to be here, particularly in my role as the Executive Director of the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, which is the MPO and local development district for the 10-county region here in Southwest Pennsylvania. My background is I came from FTA after working 20 years there, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I like the magic 8-ball analogy that Lisa Kay just used in terms of trying to figure out how we talk about mobility and how we talk about perhaps local and regional planning in this new world order that we're all living through. What I want to do is just very quickly walk through a framework, a process that we're developing here, that we've been developing really over the last few weeks in terms of planning and infrastructure and all the difficult circumstances we're all grappling with currently, and the very real constraints that we have to kind of think about and factor into our infrastructure planning and our local planning. Before I get started, I really just want to express my gratitude to one of our thought leaders here at the SPC, Kathy Stefani, who really has helped gel these concepts and outlined kind of a process for thinking about planning at a regional level with this new concept that we're talking about. Next. This is a framework that is an attempt to make sense of unpredictable environments. I mean, we're living through it right now. And really, it's incumbent on us to start thinking about how to make good decisions and investments under these really very difficult circumstances and these challenges. And think about how these emerging trends that we're dealing with, whether it's changing demographics, emerging technologies, disruptive events like pandemics, for instance, how do we start making coherent choices, especially when the stakes are really high in terms of access and equity, which is at the end of the day what much of this is about, and again, optimizing our social systems so that people really do benefit from them. It's a question that we have to ask ourselves, certainly as an MPO, when you're thinking about regional planning. Next. The first step in really knowing how to make those decisions and creating this process is really knowing your why. Why are you here? Why are you doing these things? Are you pursuing better infrastructure? Are we looking to improve access to services and societal benefits? Are we trying to improve the overall quality of life for people in our region? Obviously, the answer is yes to all of that. But thinking about how you make that happen is really important. What you see here is a little structure. Again, it's a device for thinking about all of the elements that we can influence and all of the ingredients that we need to bake this cake. If you think about it, access, infrastructure, and quality of life is really what we're thinking about and trying to promote at a regional basis. I would dare say at a national basis, but we'll confine ourselves to a regional discussion. On the far side and the left side of that little pyramid, you can see the elements that go into thinking about how to do that. You've got public transportation, obviously the road system, active transportation, pedestrianization, and something that has emerged and that we're all living through is connectivity and broadband. Then you need to bring in the regional partners, and this is of course along the perimeter here of this triangle. You need to bring all the right people to the table. You can't have this discussion in any kind of a silo. And then at the end of the day, you need to really think about regional economic development and how you're working with the private sector. So in every respect, this is truly a PPP. Again, to improve access, improve your infrastructure, and ultimately raise the quality of life for everybody who lives in your region. Next. So let me encourage you to think about this in terms of equity and access. At the outset, I think you saw that my title is Access and Equity Are Equal. They represent each other. And there are certain mobility and connectivity pillars that we really need to think about as you're doing your local planning and your regional planning so that you're optimizing access and ensuring equity, which is here at the base of this Greek temple. Again, it's the trying to design and trying to plan in unpredictable circumstances. You have to start with a number of assumptions around mobility, around connectivity, and around what your population really would like to see next. So the first pillar, and again, think of these as assumptions or pillars, or what we call them around here at the SPC because of Kathy's wonderful work is the Stefani factors. Again, a framework for thinking about planning. So the first assumption is that public transportation is here to stay. Our CEO for our planning agency here, Catherine Kellerman, who's one of the smartest people I know, just recently said that COVID didn't create these problems we're living through, but it laid them bare. And she couldn't be more right. With all of the new technologies, again, with the capabilities of service models that we have, with the new ways of providing granular service to people, I think we can safely say that public transportation is going to be here to stay, but that the service model will have to evolve. So that's assumption number one. Next. Pillar number two, or assumption number two, is that, as we all know, because we're living it right now, telemobility has become a norm. It's something that we're all used to and that we will have to factor into our daily lives and to the way we plan. I think what we're going to see as a result of this is some fundamental shifts in travel demand. And later on, you'll see that we also count land use as probably changing as a result of this telemobility. Imagine a world where you can live in Hawaii and work in New York if you're doing it right. And again, think of access, think of transportation and connectivity being the ways to access the benefits and the rewards of our society. Next. The third pillar is really, I think, one of the shifts that we'll see, and I can say this as having worked in the federal space. I think we will see the federal government really looking at more of the door-to-door ride-hailing transportation as part of our overall transportation web, our network. And particularly for people who are older or people with disabilities, again, these special need populations, I think we're going to see better service supported by federally subsidized programs in this respect. Again, thinking about access and equity. Top quality service is for anyone who needs it, regardless of their physical conditions or their circumstances. It's a big shift here, but I think we're going to see it, particularly as a result of this last year that we've lived through. Next. Pillar number four, or assumption number four. And again, this goes with the first and the third pillars, if you think about it. They all interconnect. They all support that access roof or pediment of the Greek temple you see before you. As I've mentioned, this is another service innovation that we can use in rural, suburban, and urban communities. And it's not a matter of fiction. It's something that's being done around the world. Denmark, other countries, and in the US too. There are stories of microtransit being used in rural environments around the country. Again, this is something that has become a mainline element that we need to think about when we do regional planning and when we connect it to local communities. Next. The fifth pillar, very important. This is a fact of life and it's here to stay. Virtual retail and the resulting increase in deliveries is not going to go away and has increased over the last 10 years, and as I'm sure everyone in this meeting is aware of. I'll be interested to see the numbers come out post-COVID as to what the numbers are, if that has increased, if virtual retail and deliveries have increased. We need to think about that in a planning space. We need to think of that as a planning factor in terms of street use, curb space, and all the other infrastructure that goes into supporting the increased VMTs that we're seeing from delivery vehicles. Next. Factor number 6 is really about communities and being more proactive about what they want to look like and how people in their communities want to live. It's about the quality of life objective that I mentioned earlier that you saw in the triangle. If you've been following the previous pillar assumptions, you'll also recognize that people may not be traveling in the same way, if at all. And this is maybe perhaps an issue of not having to burn a gallon of gas to go buy a quart of milk anymore. So again, thinking about how we organize our communities and how we really think about the living space that we're creating. Next. Consequently, because travel patterns will be changing, and land use will be changing, we have to think about how that development goes on. Again, thinking about land use and land as an ecosystem more than as a commodity, with jobs and services and other uses located nearby, again, tying back to the 6th pillar, which is very important for how we live in our communities. And last of all, of course, is the issue of the environment and how we can take, next, sorry, thank you. and how we take positive steps to mitigate the effects of climate change. With companies such as Ford and General Motors playing leading roles in electrification. In fact, Ford has said that they will be fully electric by 2040, and GM sold out its entire line of 2021 electric Hummers in 10 minutes just this week, earlier this week. So we're seeing a sea change in terms of how we think about the environment and what we're doing about climate change. How will this trend build better communities at the local level and improve conditions, not just locally, but regionally, and I dare say nationally? Thank you. This has been a quick run through our SPC factors, and I'm looking forward to the conversation later. Thanks.
Vincent, thank you so much for providing that framework. I think that's a great way for us to start this discussion and talking about what's really important. Why are we doing this? So thank you for that. Next up is Connie McGee, who is going to be speaking about commuter transportation. She is the president of the Association for Commuter Transportation. And also in her free time, she has a day job where she's working with Commute with Enterprise. Connie?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me. Yes. For the last 22 years, I've worked for Enterprise Holdings, managing the Commute with Enterprise program in San Francisco Bay Area, where we're helping employers and employees to van pool to and from work. And I'm also, as Lisa said, currently the board president for the Association for Commuter Transportation, otherwise known as ACT. It's tough to say which takes more of my time these days, but it's all been very rewarding. Been a very interesting year, as everybody has alluded to. It certainly put all of what we do in perspective, helped us to really zoom in, no pun intended, on what's really important and the things that we need to do, looking at things with a microscope to see how we can change and where we can pivot. So ACT, so a little bit about ACT. So we are the premier association for TDM professionals. And our goal is to build a strong community of individuals and organizations working to advance and implement TDM at work sites within communities, with the goal of creating an efficient transportation system that moves people, reduces congestion, and improves air quality and support activity. As the largest TDM, a network of TDM professionals, we bring together over 1,200 colleagues from major employers, universities, TMAs, and government agencies from across the United States. We're creating a community to learn from and collaborate with. This has been invaluable this last year as we have had to deal with the challenges that were brought on by the global pandemic. Throughout the crisis, ACT has looked for ways that we can support our members. We started by having weekly Zoom sessions on various topics around current challenges that COVID had provided for us, including recovery and reopening plans, TDM leading the way during COVID, and changing the commute message post-COVID. We also brought together a group of about 30 members from various segments of the industry to discuss how we can help employers get back to the office safely. We put together guidelines based on what we knew from the CDC and the World Health Organization. This resource supporting commuters returning to work post-COVID is available for free on our website at actweb.org. At the time, there really was no guidance, and so everybody was really looking for what do we do? So that's when it was so great that this group actually came together and put this together. We are continuing to change it. We've actually got a working group put together right now that's looking at adding any changes that we might need to add. One of the TDM solutions that was heavily impacted is, as Lisa Kay put it, my day job, van pools. We have been impacted just like other commuter transportation options. Many van pools are off the road now because they're simply not going to work. However, we have found that for many essential businesses and commuters, they are looking to van pool because they can control it. It is their own, as we call it, commute bubble. You know who gets on and off the van pool. It's the same group each day, and the group takes responsibility in keeping the van pools clean, wearing masks, using hand sanitizers when getting in and out of the van, similar to how you would at your own work place of business. I've heard from companies both in the Bay Area and across the country that they see van pool as the way back to the office for those same reasons. When we saw some of the vans start to go back to the office earlier this year, as well as starting new vans, believe it or not, we are actually starting new van pools, new groups. We've provided a clean car starter kit for van pools. The kit included masks, gloves, disinfectant spray, paper towels, and a guide on how and where to wipe down their vans daily, including the keys and the dashboards, all hard surfaces. The feedback was that it helped them feel more comfortable and confident, that along with commuting with their family, as we like to call it, it created a comfort zone. It's been very important that we have been able to react and pivot in this crisis, and that we continue to be able to do so. We're always looking for ways that we can support our members at ACT and our customers at Enterprise. As this pandemic continues, we will need to continue to react as we have to changing circumstances. In the end, the goal for ACT and Enterprise is to get people back to the office safely and using a mode other than driving alone, which is a huge concern. We don't want everyone getting back and driving alone. That would be disastrous and really would be a huge step backwards for the TDM community. I know there's a lot of fear, both for the employers and employees, around getting into a vehicle with other people or getting on a crowded train or bus. We need to be focusing on how we alleviate those fears and how we educate people on safe commuting. So work from home will work for some, and it's been great. As we were talking earlier today, our commutes are much shorter and much easier from that perspective. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for everybody, and we need to find solutions and make sure that, like you said, they're safe and people feel safe getting into them. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Connie. And I happen to be one of those people that helped with the publication that came out, and it's a great resource for, and not because I was part of it, but it's a great resource, and I would encourage people, if you would like it, it's a free download, and it's definitely something that can give you some action steps to be able to use right away. So thank you. Our next topic area is Transportation Management Association, and we have with us today Lynn Mannion, who is the Executive Director of the Airport Corridor Transportation Association. Lynn?
Thanks, Lisa Kay, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak today. So just a little bit about me. As Lisa Kay said, I'm the Executive Director of the Airport Corridor Transportation Association. Our largest project that we work on is getting people to work. And we specifically concentrate on last mile service. So that's mostly what I'll be talking about today. And just for a little bit of background about myself, I have been with ACTA for more than 25 years, probably closer to 30 years actually. And although my background is as an urban planner, my first love and my first career was in psychology. So I've kind of I can't help it, look at the psychology of the situation. I heard someone yesterday talking about COVID and their remark was that it has ripped the social fabric. And I think that's a really good description of one of the main things that has happened to all of us. And so I'll get started now talking about what I've tried to do in my presentation is talk about how sort of on the ground with our shuttle riders and the people that are working with them, how COVID-19 has changed us and what has changed. So next slide, please. Okay, just a little bit about my organization. We're a nonprofit membership-based TMA, Transportation Management Association, and we serve the airport corridor, the western suburbs of Pittsburgh. Our members are private sector businesses and public entities interested in improving the transportation system and promoting economic development. Our funding comes from federal, state, and local government grants. And our mission is to reduce congestion, improve air quality, and increase mobility options and support economic development in the airport corridor. Next slide. So just a very little bit about our last mile shuttle service, which we've been operating for about 10 years. So the purpose of last mile shuttle service is to take people the last part of their commute. So the commute begins on public transit, and then there are hub stops that in our corridor that take people the last mile to work on a shuttle. So our main hub stop transfer point is at IKEA in Robinson Township. We serve about 250 businesses in the airport corridor. We have 3 Port Authority vehicles that stop in front of the stop at IKEA. So the people get on one of these 3 vehicles in downtown Pittsburgh, and then for the last part of their trip, they ride to IKEA, and then for the last part of their trip on the shuttle. The Ride Acta West Busway meets Port Authority G2 West Busway, all stops at the Carnegie Station. So this is at the terminus of the West Busway. And we take people from the end of the West Busway again to jobs. And then this one is along what's called Campbell's Run Road, which is has a lot of businesses on it. With funding from PennDOT and help from a CMU feasibility study, we're planning a new hub stop on University Boulevard to take riders to jobs in Moon and Findlay townships. So that's just like a very brief overview of what we do. Next slide. And this is, we're very proud of this. This is about 5 years old. This picture is about 5 years old. We don't always have the colored pillows in the carpeting, but this is our super stop, which ACTA was able to build with funding from PennDOT, PNC, and IKEA. Actually, IKEA donated the land. This is right in front of IKEA. And as I said, it's the main hub stop. And the idea was to make it not just for Port Authority buses and shuttles, but to make it a place where people could come and relax. We have a fix-it station for bikes. We have an activity board that gives information about what's happening in the corridor. Okay, next slide. All right, so now I just wanted to get in this page to what's changed, what's missing, what's the impact of COVID-19 in general on the people that I deal with as I do my job. So these are just some things that I have thought. We travel much less by car or transit and much more virtually. We do our job at home some or all of the time. It's often more difficult to pick up the phone and call someone because many of those working from home are not easily available by phone. They have to pick up messages from their work phone and return the call. As a result, things tend to move more slowly. For those with young children, working from home is a necessity. Our job is done in isolation. There's no opportunity to run to the next office or cubicle to ask a quick question. Collaboration is missing. Face-to-face, in-person interactions are few. We're warned not to breathe the same air as our colleagues. Next slide. And so in preparation for this presentation, we did a little survey and tried to get some of our riders, our shuttle provider, and also our dispatcher and some of the drivers to just make some, tell us how things have changed during COVID-19. So the first one is from a shuttle rider. Every time someone jumps in the bus with me without a mask, it makes me feel really frightened. From Juan, who's a shuttle provider, COVID-19 has really changed the way we run operations. Ridership has gone down in the beginning, but is up because of shoppers. Marco, who's a shuttle rider, I was unemployed March 23rd and hired by Velasquez on July 23rd. We have to take temperatures at work, and it's important to stay safe and protect yourself. And the last one is from one of the shuttle drivers, Estelle. My commute has changed drastically. Instead of driving the speed limit, people are going at least 20 to 30 miles over. This really scares me, and I fear for my life every time I get behind the wheel of my car or the shuttle. Okay, next slide. Okay, so how has last mile shuttle service changed? Ride Acta lost 79% of its ridership. Service is quicker, more responsive because there are not the same demands on the service. There are fewer riders and less traffic. ACTA has been able to provide the same timeframes for service at 6 a.m. to midnight, but uses fewer vehicles. So there's some positives or some negatives. In terms of shuttle riders, many have lost their jobs. Many have been exposed to the virus. In terms of our drivers, many were laid off. Some tested positive for the virus. And actually, I was just talking about this yesterday. And since the pandemic started in March, I think the first 3 months, there were many of the drivers out of work, but more recently, 90% of them have come back, and 10% of them were invited to come back, but declined. I don't know where they went. I didn't get that information. So local businesses who employees use the shuttle to get to work. We had 2 call centers that actually comprised 50% of the ridership pre-pandemic that went out of business. In addition, each call center made significant contributions to ACTA to operate the service. So not only did we lose the business, lose the ridership, we also lost two big donors to our service. Shuttle serve office staff, they're working from home while overseeing online learning for their children. I'm sorry, I can't see that last part. So, okay. Supervisors need to be sensitive to the challenges that workers accept when working from home. This is about the office staff. And into the future, I think we have one more slide. Yeah, okay. So what's new? Zoom. To me, that's the overwhelming what's new. Endless meetings online. Minimal traffic congestion most days for those who commute to work. Is there anything positive? We have all been forced to change the way we work, to rethink what we do and how we need to do it. We have more frequent communication. This is actually something from us, from ACTA. We have more frequent communication with PennDOT. The PennDOT Transit Bureau has been very helpful, supportive, and thoughtful. They've provided masks to us to distribute to drivers and riders. What's next? Ridership is slowly increasing. ACTA is planning to expand service to a larger area of the airport corridor. A new hub stop is planned on University Boulevard in Moon Township. This proposed stop will eventually serve most of the large job centers in Moon and Findlay. And finally, ACTA is working with CMU to identify funding to develop a new app that's designed to better accommodate last mile service. And do we have, I think that's the last slide, right? Okay. Thank you.
Lynn, thank you so much. It's amazing to hear the comments from the participants who ride the shuttle service, as well as from the people who are driving. And it was a little validating to hear that other people feel that people are driving faster, because I had that same impression, but it was interesting to hear that come out in your presentation. So our next topic is university transportation. And I think most of you will not have to guess very hard as to where Jason works. He is the Special Projects Coordinator for Transportation Services at Penn State. Jason.
Thanks, Lisa Kay. Thanks for having me today. It's great to be a part of the conference. Being a Penn Stater, it certainly would have been great to have been on campus and been in person, but I'm glad that everyone's able to participate in this format. So what I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes is really the impacts to transportation services at Penn State University, to give you kind of a glimpse at how the pandemic has affected transportation operations for a major university. And certainly, you look at other major universities across the country, there are certainly differences, particularly for those that aren't super familiar with Penn State. We're in a pretty rural area. Certainly some of our challenges are a little different than universities in more urban areas. But I think overall, you would be able to take a lot of these challenges and extrapolate those to other major universities across the country. Next slide, please. So just over the next few minutes, again, we'll talk very quickly about a little background on myself and the department, give you a bit of a timeline on sort of how COVID impacted the university and sort of how the university reacted to it, and then the impacts going through the different areas of our operations. Next slide. So again, Jason Thomas, Special Projects Coordinator for Transportation Services. I'm a Penn State graduate, so most of my adult life has been spent at Penn State, minus a couple years in between college and working with transportation services. I worked in the parking operations side for about 11 years. And for the last 6 years in my current role, I primarily manage the marketing communications efforts for our department. So transportation services at Penn State, we're responsible for pretty much everything related to campus transportation. Parking is probably the biggest part of our operation. You can see we have over 21,000 parking spaces at University Park. We are an auxiliary unit, so we are essentially a self-funded operation. We do receive some central funding, meaning tuition dollars from the university, but the bulk of our operation is self-funded. So what that means, and this is true for most university transportation operations around the country, is that parking revenue is ultimately what pays for the other services that you offer. So there's always this push and pull between you want to support and promote sustainable transportation efforts and get people into van pooling and using transit and biking. But at the same time, for those programs to exist, you have to have enough people driving and parking on campus to be able to afford them. So that's always a challenge with the funding model that we have and that most other universities have in the transportation space. So you can see we have campus transit sort of split. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a few minutes. So CATA is the Center Area Transportation Authority. They are the local transit operator for the center region. We're State College, PA, Center County, right in the middle of the state. So CATA operates community service routes. They have 23 routes that serve the center region. We contract them for our campus transit service. And they offer 4 routes that serve the bulk of the campus in the downtown area, which sits just south of the campus. We supplement that with shuttle service. There's a 2-route shuttle service that serves some of the same areas and then also some other sort of more remote areas of campus that the CATA services do not serve. We provide a shuttle to Hershey Medical Center. So Penn State operates a medical center in Hershey, PA, which is about an hour and a half from State College. So that's a service that we provide for the College of Medicine for their employees to go back and forth between University Park and Hershey Medical Center. We have a community transit pass program where we essentially subsidize bus passes for full-time faculty and staff and graduate students. And then our sustainable transportation programs, we have a pretty robust biking program. We're a silver level bike-friendly university from the League of American Cyclists. We have bike share on campus, car share, ride sharing programs. CATA operates a van pool program that is heavily, many or most of its users are university employees. And then we also have a fleet services. So we do vehicle rental for university business, for university employees, and driver services. So for VIP trips, field trips, transporting sports teams, those sort of things, we have full-time drivers that do that. And you can see just sort of the demographics of the university. So next slide, please. So just to give you a very quick run through of the sort of timeline of how the university kind of responded to COVID as it sort of things unraveled in mid-March. So March 12th, Penn State announced that, and this was during spring break, so students were away during spring break when this was announced, that classes would be held remotely. And at that time, they put into place it would be through April 3rd. So we didn't yet know how serious things were going to be. So rather than they sort of put a short timeline to sort of see how the next few weeks went. We did not make any major changes at that point to our operations, but during spring break, we have reduced transit service in place. So that reduced level of service, we continued that over the next few weeks as the remote learning started. It did not take long, however, March 18th, that Penn State announced that the remainder of the spring semester would be held remotely. March 22nd was where things really changed for our operations. Governor Wolf announced that all non-life sustaining businesses in Pennsylvania must close their physical locations. As a result of this, most offices on campus closed. This included both our transportation services and fleet operation offices. We instituted weekend parking, meaning we weren't ticketing in the same way as we normally would be for parking. People had access to additional areas. We suspended our campus shuttle service and our Hershey shuttle service. Next slide, please. March 25th is when CATA really had its biggest impact at the start of the pandemic. They ceased collection of fares. This was really a safety measure to be able to have passengers, what few passengers were riding at that point, be able to board at the back doors of the bus so that to limit the exposure to drivers. They reduced their service down from 23 community routes down to just 5. They ended their services early, now at 8 p.m., and removed weekend service at that point. We continued to have campus service, but just 2 of the 4 routes, and they were running on reduced service from what they would normally be operating during the semester. Late March and early April, 2 of our shared services suspended their operations. We had at that time Zagster as our bike share provider and Enterprise Car Share as our car share provider on campus. They'd both been relatively successful, but the lack of students on campus, the inability or the sort of uncertainty of how to operate those kind of shared services early in the pandemic with the touch points and kind of all the things that we were learning at that point, those services were suspended. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but ultimately both of those services ended their operations totally in the summer. So as of now, we no longer have bike share or car share vendors on campus. April 3rd, we announced that a prorated refund process for students registered for parking would be implemented. I'll show a little bit more about that. It was a pretty big financial impact to our operations to do that. It went along with the fact that the university issued prorated housing refunds to students that were living on campus for the remaining time of the semester. So huge financial impacts to the university, particularly in the housing space. April 15th was when Penn State announced that summer classes would be held remotely. Next slide, please. I think this is the last little bit of our timeline. Late April, Penn State announced that employees with no work available would be moved to 50% pay for May and June. So the university, to their credit, really tried to take care of its employees as best as it could. In the month of April, there were a number of employees, including those on our staff, who were sent home, had no work that they could do. Their roles were such that teleworking was not possible, but they were continued. They were paid in full for the month of April. But then many of those staff, and this was about 60% of our staff, were moved to 50% pay for the months of May and June. So definitely an impact to our employees and a number of employees that work in areas like physical plant, dining, other sort of operational areas on campus. May 19th, Penn State announced that employees on 50% pay would have their parking fees refunded for those months. All other employees at full pay would continue to be charged for their permits. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. That was a controversial subject that was one that was difficult for us to manage. We did ultimately, but certainly not without its share of critics. June 14th, Penn State announced that fall classes would be a combination of in-person and remote. And then finally on July 1st, we announced our plans. We were given permission by the university to reopen. So we resumed our operations on July 6th. Our offices reopened, we returned to normal parking, and our normal summer level of campus shuttle service resumed. Next slide, please. So this is just sort of very, very general impacts to our operations. I find this would be true for a lot of similar operations. Obviously, our employees, those that are able to telework, continue to do so. But when you run customer service operations with offices that are open, drivers on shuttles, there's certainly a lot of our employees that do have to come to work and have a degree of risk in doing so each day. All employees and customers must wear a mask. We certainly spent a lot of money trying to sort of retrofit some of our areas to make them safer for customers and employees. Plexiglass we added in our front counter areas. We added in our shuttle to isolate the driver from the passengers. We did, because of university mandates, we've had to reduce the capacity in our university vehicles. So our campus shuttle service, we've gone from 25 down to 5 riders that we're allowed to take at a time, which has certainly impacted our ability to deliver services. Our driver trips now, if we have a field trip and there's 50 people that would normally ride a bus, right now I think we can take like 8 to 12 of them in a bus at a time. And if an employee wants to go or needs to go in university business and they're renting a fleet vehicle, they have to travel alone. So pretty big impacts to those operations. We've implemented a number of cleaning measures. Fortunately, our cleaning measures for our vehicles were already pretty robust. We didn't have to do a lot of new things to really be in line with COVID-19 standards, but where we did, we enacted those hand sanitizer stations added in our areas. We slightly reduced the hours that our offices were open to give us extra time for cleaning. And some of it, frankly, particularly on our fleet side, part of it is just reduced business. In the past, we would have been open on Saturdays and Sundays to accommodate trips, VIP events on campus, people leaving for university business. But there is just so much less business right now that there isn't demand to be able to do that. We switched to credit card only payment in our offices to eliminate cash handling. And then a positive, we did add touchless ticket issuance in our parking decks to take out that step of having to touch the buttons on the machine when people would be entering. Next slide. Again, I talked about the importance of parking, and I know this is shared mobility, but parking in the university environment drives, no pun intended, everything that we do and are able to do. So just to show you some of the impacts, and I won't go through every single one of these, that really the 2 biggest things I'll talk about are near the top, you can see there, it says unable to accept permit returns from March through July. So when our offices were closed, we weren't able to process permits. We have a system at the university where employees that work within departments serve as sort of parking representatives, and they issue permits to employees within their units, sort of control who has access to them. They're not on campus either. So there was certainly some debate over during that time whether there were many employees that thought they shouldn't be paying for parking during that time because they weren't able to come to campus. But at the same time, if you ultimately make that decision, there's essentially no revenue coming into the university to pay, from a transportation standpoint, to pay for any of the services that we still need to maintain. So the university ultimately made a decision. It was not the most popular one at the time. Ultimately, people kind of came to live with it, but those that were on 50% pay status were issued a refund for their parking during those months. But the university made the decision, if you were still being paid in full by the university while our offices were closed, basically being made whole from a salary standpoint, you were going to continue to pay for your parking until our offices reopened. And then once our offices did reopen, we were able to start accepting those returns again. So if people who were teleworking or were expecting to telework for some time would be able to end paying for their permit. So you can see at the bottom the impact that last thing that I mentioned has had. We've seen about a 10% decline in our faculty staff permit holders from December 2019 versus this year. That is actually a mild increase or decrease compared to some of the things I'll show you in a few minutes, but that has, even 10% certainly has a big financial impact on our operations. Next slide, please. From the student standpoint, in the spring semester, we had to issue over 8,000 prorated refunds for student parking for the months of April and May. So again, a huge cut into the parking revenue that we generate from student parking on campus. And you can see here with very little student sales in the summer because very few students were on campus. A couple of changes we made to sort of increase the number of people parking on campus. We're allowing more first-year students, which typically we don't allow those students to park on campus. Increased access for graduate students to buy upgraded parking. But even with those measures, you can see from December of last year, a 41% decline in our student parking. So again, a huge impact on our bottom line. Next slide. I'll try to race through these last couple. Visitor parking, we essentially have almost no visitor parking operations right now, which is a big part of our budget. So Not only just fewer people coming to campus for university business, for just general visits, going to our creamery, which is, and other sort of popular destinations on campus. There's very little of that right now. A lot of offices remain closed other than for essential functions. But where we've really seen the impact is in events. So you can see some of the major events that happen on campus every year. Football, and that was kind of why I had my backdrop, which is our whiteout game every year, which typically has about 110,000 people at Beaver Stadium on campus. We did not have attendees at our football games this fall, and all these other events that draw thousands of people to campus and the community did not happen. So big economic impact on us as an operation, but even more profound on the university and the community, the businesses in the community. This town is usually pretty robust in the fall, a little less busy in the summer. Right now, it's slower than any time of year and at any point I can remember in my life. Next slide, please. So CATA, I mentioned earlier, is the transit operator for the community that we partner with for campus service. They did not make changes to their capacity in terms of restricting the number of riders. They didn't feel that they could operate service in doing that, but they made some service decisions to try to reduce the number of riders per bus. Ultimately, we found that demand was so much less than expected that really those measures weren't even necessary. The subsidized pass program that we issue, you can see we had over 1,400 refunds that we issued in the spring for that program. In the fall, to assist CATA, we made a decision to suspend 2 of our campus routes, which do 7-figure riders a year. And the idea was to move those resources over to the community to be able to help serve what they expected to be high traffic areas and maintain more socially distanced service. Ultimately, that turned out to not be necessary, and we resumed service of 1 of those routes. So 3 of the 4 campus routes are operating at this point. CATA has no Sunday service right now and no service past, that's actually incorrect. There's no service past 10 p.m. right now. They suspended some commuter routes due to low ridership. Their van pull program, which usually has, I believe, in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 active van pulls, I believe very few, if any of those, are operational right now. And then you can see their ridership declines, 86% decline over last year for the fall on community ridership, on campus a 95% decline, and overall 90% decrease in ridership for the fall semester for CATA. Next slide. Very quickly, our campus shuttle, similar, a 90% decline in ridership. Our Hershey shuttle service that I mentioned for our medical center, it's been suspended since March, so it's not a service that we haven't been operating. And then our fleet services area has really been hit hard with basically university business being restricted heavily, 95% reduction in daily vehicle rentals. We have a significant reduction in our driver services trips with few events happening. Normally they're taking sports teams, field trips, VIP events, and those just aren't happening right now. And unfortunately, that has meant that we've had some furloughs, and we're for that staffing still at a lower number than what we were prior to COVID-19. Next slide. We no longer have bike share, car share, or ride share services. Unfortunately, all of the providers that operate in that space have shut down or are about to shut down those services across the country. So though there's not much demand for those right now, it does certainly put us in a position as we look to get back to normal times, trying to figure out how we offer those services again. We are currently in sort of search mode for new vendors. We're hopeful for next year that we'll be able to offer those again. Next slide. And for the future, and I won't go into more of this, it is unknown. The challenges are immense. You can see the impacts that we've had financially on our operations. We've been able to sort of maintain financially, but depending on how long the status quo continues, could have serious long-term impacts on our ability to provide the services that we do. So that's what I have. Thank you so much for your time. Sorry if I went a little long there.
Thank you, Jason. And I really appreciate all of the panelists and Jason, especially talking about some of the revenue hits that have occurred, changes to the basic business function, and all the changes that are happening. So thank you, and thanks to all the panelists for sharing their stories. One thing, we have a couple minutes left, and one of the things that I would like to ask the presenters and is for each one of them to give us one sentence. We're looking at the impacts of what have happened, what we think might be coming in the future, and we're all shaking that magic 8 ball, hoping for a different answer. But I'd like to ask each of the presenters to just share one brief sentence about what have you learned? What is the most important lesson you have learned since March, since our whole world has gone upside down? And this could be something personal you'd like to share, or something about your service. Anyone like to go first?
I don't mind jumping in just very quickly. I think what I've learned is that broadband and connectivity are things that are here to stay with us. If the 18th century brought us the canal system, and the 19th century brought the transcontinental rail system, and the 20th century brought the national highway system, the interstate system, I think the 21st century, or I think where we are now, is going to bring us broadband and connectivity. It's going to become one of our basic transportation modes, and we'll see it as such.
Thanks, Vincent.
I think the thing that I've learned the most is we always have in our head the way things are, how we've done things, and we move forward that way. And I know in the beginning of this, it was very challenging to really shake our brains up and to look at how do we change things? How do things change just so drastically? I think for years we've looked at commuter transportation as, we're trying to get people out of their cars, we're trying to make these changes. And this is really, made this go a lot quicker, made us really kind of go further into the future, and be able to sort of wipe the slate clean, and come up with new plans, but to think differently. It's challenging at times, and there's times when you really want to go back to the way, because it is challenging. It kind of hurts your brain sometimes, but it has been, it's been exciting in some ways to be able to sort of reimagine and redraw how this is going to look.
Thanks,
I
Connie.
say that I think the thing that I've learned is what social beings we are, and that we can't live without each other, and we don't want to live without each other.
Thanks, Lynn. Jason?
Yeah, it was really exactly what I was going to say. I think how important our daily interactions are with everyone, all that we take for granted, with our coworkers, our customers, our family, our friends, how much that's been impacted over these last number of months, and just how important I think that is for us as human beings, and part of what makes us who we are. Missing that tremendously.
David, would you like to chime in as well?
Sure, I'll just throw it in. I said it earlier to all our group. I think we're in an unprecedented time as a transportation planner. The books have been turned upside down. We don't know where we're going to head. It's an interesting and exciting time as well. I think, you look at the positives that come out of something like this, and how we can now look at at what we do in a different way. So, and I think you see it from everyone's presentations on what a great impact it has, but then what potential of a great change we have moving forward. So.
Thank you. I would like to thank everyone for the presentations today. I'd like to thank the attendees for being here and staying the entire session, which is so impressive. I think this is just the beginning of the conversation, and knowing that there's lots and lots of more discussion to be had to talk about the way we want our communities to be, the way transportation is going to play a role in that, and how we continue to go forward. So thank you again, and I wish you a great rest of the conference. I know there's one more session. Enjoy it, and hope you get to enjoy some of the sunshine today. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.